Ready to go over chapter 15? I know I am. Psychoanalysis. Canst thou not minister to a mind diseased? Asked Macbeth of a doctor. But the passage is so strikingly fitting, so prophetically explanatory of psychoanalysis, that it must be given in full. Macbeth, canst thou not minister to a mind diseased? Pluck from the memory a rooted sorrow. Raise out the written troubles of the brain, and with some sweet oblivious antidote, cleanse the stuffed bosom of that perilous stuff which weighed upon the heart? Doctor, therein the patient must minister to himself. There is hardly a person today, except from some form of phobia or fear, whose origin may date so far back as to be lost among the shadows of childhood. Hardly a person is free from some aversion or complex, whose effects are a matter of daily occurrence, despite the will of the victim. In a sense, the subconsciousness has never forgotten the incident, and still harbors the unpleasant memory of it. The consciousness, however, in an attempt to protect our dignity or vanity, whichever you prefer, may evolve some apparent better reason than the original one. Thus, complexes are formed. Okay, basically what that paragraph was saying is that everything you have ever been through, every experience that you've had, is embedded in your subconsciousness. And that is so true, because there is a lot of things that we all go through things, and and sometimes things happen that bring back those times, and we get so absorbed in that time again. It's almost like we literally feel like we're living in that moment as if it were at the time that it happened. That's amazing. It's amazing how that works. Thus complexes are formed. Brontophobia, or fear of thunder, was brought about in the case of one patient by hearing a cannon go off very near her when she was a child, in fact, which had been forgotten for years. To confess to such a fear, even to oneself, would have been childish, and fear to the somewhat more dignified cause of thunder. Needless to say, it is such disguises of the memories which make difficult the labor of the psychoanalysis. Excuse me, you guys, I'm sorry. Needless to say, it is such disguises of the memories which make difficult the labor of the psychoanalysis, to pluck from the memory a rooted sorrow, to raise out the written troubles of the brain, its traumas, or the original shocks. And when we remember that psyche in Greek means not only the mind, but the soul, we can better understand Shakespeare's amazing grasp of psychology when he speaks not only of the mind diseased, but of that perilous stuff which weighs upon the heart. Psyche. Psyche means the mind. It is your psyche, your mental processes. We all have these complexes, in forms ranging from the mild to the severe. Cytophobia, the aversion of certain foods. Claustrophobia, the fear of locked doors, to which the fear of open spaces forms a striking contrast. Stage fright, touching wood, or other superstitions. A thorough list would indeed be a very long one. For the greater part, the patient must minister to himself with the help of the skilled psychoanalyst. In some cases, elaborate processes are needed, and the use of psychometers and other delicate registering devices enlisted, but usually the procedure is a simple one. The subject of investigation is made comfortable physically and put in a quiet mood. He is then told to utter whatever may come to his mind in connection with his complex. With occasional promptings and questions from the psychoanalysis, sooner or later the association of ideas will bring to the surface the original cause or experience, which had become rooted, submerged. Very often the mere explanation will suffice to eradicate the obsession. But there is another group of disorders, hysteria, which may partake both of the physical and the psychical, or where either state may induce the other. Richard Inglis, in his History and Power of Mind, had summed up the matter very clearly. Disease may be divided into two classes, The imaginary and the real. Imaginary disease is a picture held firmly by the objective mind, which causes more or less physical correspondence. This kind of disease is often created in total disregard of the laws governing anatomy or physiology, and is the hardest to cure because persons possessed of it hold to it so persistently that an entire revision of their mode of thought must be made before it can be cured. They must change their whole way of thinking before they can cure themselves in the psychical realm, the mind space, your mind. It is not at all infrequent to have a patient complain of kidney disease, locating the pain in the organs several inches below the waistline. The spleen is often supposed to be in the right side of the body, and phantom tumors appear and disappear, but all these mental pictures, if held long enough, creates matricles or vortices, and draws into them the elements that will bring finally the actual disease that was at first purely imaginary. Psychoanalysis proceeds upon the assumption that a very large number of cases of diseases are caused by repression of normal desires, or by disturbances that have occurred in the past life of the individual. In some cases, the root of the disease is so concealed, sometimes through years and years, that it must be searched for. We all have our own times to liberate from ourselves. The psychoanalysis is enabled to locate such difficulties through dreams, or rather through the interpretation of dreams, or by questioning the patient concerning his past life. The well-trained analyst must of necessity secure the friendly confidence of the patient to such an extent that the latter will not hesitate to reveal any experience, no matter how intimate. As soon as the patient has led to remember a particular experience, he is encouraged to talk about it in detail, and thus it is brought up from the subconsciousness. The analyst then shows him what has been causing the difficulty, and when the cause is eradicated, it can do no more harm. It is exactly parallel to a foreign substance in the flesh. There is a horrible swelling, with inflammation, pain, and suffering. The surgeon is called, removes the difficulty, and Nature does the rest. Nature does the rest. The psychological law follows the same procedure. If there has been any abnormal activity, any festering sore in the subconscious mind, going on for years and years, if it can be located by the process of mental analysis and put out of the mental complex and shown to the patient, the catharsis is complete. Dr. Hugh T. Patrick, clinical professor of nerves and mental disease in Northwestern University Medical School, mentions several interesting cases. In many cases of functional nervous disorders, the factor of fear is quite obvious, but in many cases, though equally important, it is not at once apparent. Of the latter, there are numerous varieties which may be divided into groups. One group embraces patients known to have physical courage. A few years ago, there was referred to me one of the most noted as well as fearless men in the ring, a man who was so peculiarly carefree, if not careless. He was suffering with what was considered rather vague and baffling nervous symptoms, principally insomnia, lack of interest, and moodiness. A careful analysis soon revealed that some trifling symptoms, due to high living and domestic friction, had served to put the idea into his head that he was losing his mind. This phobia was sickness, and the fear so possessed his soul that he was good for nothing until he got rid of it. Needless to say, the patient himself was quite unconscious of the nature of his trouble, and his physician had overlooked it. So they could not cure the trouble from a physical standpoint. The situation had to be mentally analyzed, and the cause of the fear dragged out from subconsciousness and exposed to the man. When he had a look at it, why, it had exactly the same effect as pulling an eyelash out from an inflamed eye and letting you see it. Your troubles are all over right away, because you are very sure the disturbing cause has been removed, and you forget about it then. A sheep rancher of Wyoming complained of insomnia, loss of appetite, abdominal distress, general nervousness, and inability to look after his ranch. What really was the matter with him was fear of cancer of the stomach. This phobia completely unnerved him and caused him to enormously magnify every bodily sensation. But was he a nerveless coward? Decidedly not. There was a time when the cattlemen of the far west made sheep raising a hazardous occupation. Through these dangerous years he lived with the tremor, though he never went to sleep without a rifle by his side. Once he was informed that 3 cattlemen had started out to get him, and the information was correct. He mounted his horse and, properly armed, rode out to meet them. As he expressed it, he talked them out of it, and the 3 would-be assassins turned and rode away. In this encounter he was not in the least apprehensive or uncomfortable, and I learned of the incident only in a conversation about his business. He had plenty of physical courage, but when something in the inner organism seemed to be wrong, he was scared. As soon as the doctor discovered what the fear was, he probably produced an X-ray or something of the nature that to show the patient that there was nothing the matter. Then, drawing the patient's attention to the groundless fear, the doctor was able to convince the patient of the groundlessness of his fears. A policeman, 49 years old, suffered from intractable insomnia, head pressure, general nervousness, and loss of weight. He was not a man to suspect of fear. For many years he had been in active service in one of the worst prisons in Chicago, and on account of his familiarity with criminals was frequently sent after the worst types. He had been in numerous gunfights. Once a notorious gunman, standing beside him, fired point blank at his head. All this disturbed his equanimity, not a whit, and yet his illness was the result of fear pure and simple. It came about in this way. A malicious person had preferred against him charges of misconduct, and he was cited to appear before the trial board. This worried him greatly. Innocent, he keenly felt the disgrace of the accusation, and feared that he might be suspended or even discharged. He trembled for his well-earned good name, and for his home, on which there was a mortgage. Naturally, he began to sleep poorly, to have queer feelings in his head, and then to feel uncertain of himself. At this juncture, some friends sympathetically told him that one could go insane from worry. These were the steps: fear of disgrace, fear of financial collapse, fear of insanity. But did the patients know all this? Not he. He knew only that he was nervous, and that he suffered, and that he did not feel sure of himself. When that was dragged out of his consciousness and shown to him as the root of his trouble, the physician was able to assure him that fear was all in the world that was the matter with him. He made up his mind that he had better give that up than he was healed. Excuse me, sorry. I just ate right now, and it's like fighting to come out while I'm trying to read this. I know I probably should have waited, but I couldn't. I just really needed to read this. I'm having a lot of fun. It's what happens when you do what you were born to do. The subconscious mentally is sick in a chronic way. It has been made sick by some kind of mental experience, usually of many years standing, and the sickness is the result of its continuing to cherish that experience and keeping it before itself. This constitutes what is technically called a running sore in the subconsciousness, that is, mentally, not physically. Mentally, there is another thing I will be reading with you guys. It's called metaphysics. I've been reading about metaphysics for last year and a half. It's God's mental laws. There's physics, which is God's physical laws. There's metaphysics, which is God's mental laws. And there's quantum physics, which goes beyond basically the whole universal energy, the cosmic intelligence, the mind of which all things have proceeded from. A woman had suffered from general debility for a number of years and had been unable to secure relief. The psychoanalyst began to probe to see what the trouble was. He began to pronounce words, just anything that came into his thoughts: desk, book, rug, Chinaman. When he pronounced the word Chinaman, the woman appeared startled, and he asked her what the word Chinaman suggested to her and why it startled her. The woman said that when she was a little girl, she was with a playmate, used to play around a Chinese laundry, that they used to plague the Chinaman by throwing pebbles at him through the open door, that one day the Chinaman chased him with a big knife, and that they were nearly scared to death. Yes, said the psychologist. That is one of the things that I wanted to know. Then he began to pronounce more words. Presently the word water, and again the woman was startled. It developed then that one time when she was a very little girl, she and her brother were playing on the wharf, and that accidentally she pushed him into the water, and he was drowned. She said it was many years ago, when she was a mere child. He said, "Do you think of these things very often?" She said, "No, I do not know that I have thought of them before in 15 or 20 years." "Well," he said, "I will tell you what I want you to do." She was at the time in a sanitarium, under the care of a nurse. "I want you to tell the nurse every day that experience about the Chinaman, and also the experience about your brother. And I want you to keep telling it until you have told it so many times that you do not feel bad about it anymore. Then, see me again in 2 or 3 weeks." She did as he directed, and at the end of the 60 days she was well. The effect of telling it so often was its becoming commonplace to the conscious mentally, without touching the feelings. So the suggestion then went down to the subconsciousness that it did not feel badly about the incident anymore, and the conditions of fear which had persisted for 20 or 25 years were erased, and the complex in the subconsciousness was no longer in evidence. The subconscious mind has perfect memory and is fully equipped at birth. Every child inherits certain characteristics from its ancestors. These are carried in the subconscious mind and brought into play when the life or health of the individual requires them. It's very interesting. Every child inhibits certain characteristics from its ancestors. If you guys haven't seen any of my chakra videos, it talks about the root chakra, the very first chakra in your body, the Muladhara, which is located at the base of your spine. It is this chakra that all the triumphs, all the tribulations, everything that have your ancestries have gone through has been embedded in this part of you, this physical part of you. That is very interesting, and it's very cool how it all comes in circle like that. It is natural to be born without pain, to develop without pain, to live without pain, and to die without pain. This is as natural as it is for a tree to blossom and bear fruit, which at the proper times drops off without distress. The subconscious will take care of every situation, even when it is interfered with. It has a remedy available for every situation. Again, you forget something, but the subconscious mind has not forgotten. As soon as the conscious mind dismisses the matter, it comes to us. Every engineer knows what it is to sleep over a problem. While he is asleep, the subconscious is working it out. Or he may lose an article, get excited and anxious about it, and not be able to find it. Yet as soon as the conscious mind gives it up and lets go, the sense of where it comes from without effort. Again, there is a difficult situation in your affairs. If you can only persuade your conscious mind to let go, to cease its anxiety, dismiss its fear, give up the tenseness and struggle, the subconscious will ordinarily bring about prosperity. The tendency of the subconscious is always towards health and harmonious conditions. To illustrate, you are in the water over your depth, and you cannot swim, you are sinking. In the moment the lifeguard approaches you, you grab him around the neck and impede the actions of his arms and limbs. He may be unable to do anything with you, but if you will simply trust yourself in his hands, he will get you out. And so it is absolutely certain that the subconscious will be present in every difficult situation, and that it will tend to play lifeguard in your favor. If you can but persuade your consciousness to cease its anxiety, to dismiss its fears, to give up the tenseness of the struggle. Suppose the conscious mind suffers itself to become angry over every trifle. Every time it gets angry, the impulse is transferred to the subconscious. The impulse is repeated again and again, each time it is stirred up. The second record of anger is added to the first, the third to the second, and the fourth and the third. Soon the subconscious has, and the fourth to the third. I know that kind of sounded a little weird when I said it. Soon the subconscious has acquired the habit, and before long it will be difficult to stop. When the situation develops, the conscious mind will be subject to the irritating influence from without and the habitual impulse from within. There will be action and reaction. It will be easier to be angry and more difficult to prevent it. Yet every time the conscious mind gets angry, an additional impulse will be given to the subconscious, and that impulse will be an additional incentive to get you angry again. Now the anger is an abnormal condition, and any abnormal conditions contains within itself the penalty. Add this penalty will be promptly reflected in that part of the body which has the least resistance. For instance, if a person has a weak stomach, there will be acute attacks of indigestion, and eventually these will become chronic. In other persons, Bright's disease may develop, in other rheumatism, and so on. It is evident, therefore, that these conditions are effects, but if the cause be removed, the effect will vanish. If the individual knows that thoughts are causes and conditions are effects, he will promptly decide to control his thoughts. This will tend to erase anger and other bad mental habits. As the light of truth gradually becomes clear and perfect, the habit and everything connected with it will be erased, and the accumulated distress destroyed. What is true of anger is true of jealousy, of fear, of lust, of greed, of dishonesty. Each of these may become subconscious, and each of them eventually result in some diseased condition of the body, and the nature of the disease indicates to the trained analyst the nature of the cause which was responsible for the condition. Frederick Pierce tells us in Our Unconscious Mind, "It is a matter of common observation that everything is in greater or less degree suggestible. The reaction to suggestion may be either positive or negative, either an acceptance or a heightened resistance. In this we see a censorship, an epidemic of a certain type of crime shows, on the part of the perpetrators, imitative response to suggestion implanted both by the elaborate descriptive accounts in the newspapers and by the great amount of discussion of the outrages heard on all sides. Primitive effects of great intensity are aroused. They break through the primary cultural censorship, which is weak in the criminally disposed person, accumulate energy on being dwelt on in consciousness, and finally become sufficiently strong to surmount all fear of punishment and to control the conduct. The remainder of the social group, having a higher central cultural censorship, reacts to the same suggestion negatively and discharges the energy of whatever primitive effects have been aroused in the form of wrath and the desire for punishment of the criminals. In this connection, it is interesting to note that one often hears the desire for vengeance expressed in terms of a much greater primitive violence than the crime itself actually showed. Psychoanalysis shows that this is a method by which the individual is reinforcing in his own non too strong censorship of his unconscious. Mind in itself is believed to be a subtle form of static energy, from which rises the activities called thought, which is the dynamic phase of mind. Mind is static energy. Thought is dynamic energy, the two phases of the same thing. Walker. Traditional whispers that the sky is a bird, as blue as the sky itself, which brings to its finders happiness. But everything cannot see it, for mortal eyes are prone to be blinded by the glitter of wealth, fame, and position, and deceived by the mocking will-o'-the-wisp of empty honors. But for the fortunate ones who seek with open eyes and hearts, with the alert artlessness, simplicity, and faith, which are richest in childhood, there is an underlying promise, and to them the bluebird lives and carols, and rejoices, a rejoicing symbol of happiness and contentment unto the end. Now that is the end of chapter 15 on psychoanalysis. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you made it this far with me, I want to congratulate you because you are taking the initiative of learning things that are very amazing. I know these videos are really long. It's necessary. I guarantee you, if you keep watching them and just stick with me, you're going to learn a lot. You're going to learn a lot about yourself. If you like my videos, please subscribe. And if you really like them, I would appreciate if you share it. And I'll see you guys on the other side of the galaxy.